pleasure, and you're going to see why I love it when Bashier speaks, and I think he's the best in this industry and this field to deliver this. He's the CEO of Nexia SAB&T. Bashier Adam unpacks today the highlights of the 2024 National Budget Speech. He's the founding partner of Nexia SAB&T, established in 1994, after completing his training contract with a medium-sized firm in Johannesburg. Over the years, Bashier has been instrumental in determining the strategic direction and growth of this amazing firm, culminating in the creation of one of the largest independent empowerment firms in South Africa. He was influential in the firm becoming a member of Nexia International, one of the leading global accounting and business networks in the world. He's serving as a director on the international board of Nexia. That's why he obviously is traveling so much and so busy. And he's also the chairman of the EMEA board of Nexia. And in his mind, nothing is impossible to a willing mind. Ladies and gentlemen, give Bashier Adam a big round of applause.
Thanks, Kevin. To all the business partners that joined us today and joined the Ubuntu Foundation, thank you very much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, all of you, none of this is possible without you, so thank you very much for you being here. I'm not going to do the sales talk about who we are. All right. Good? We're good? All right. So I'm not going to do the sales talk about who we are and where we're from. I think Kevin, our chief sales officer, has done a great job about that already. So we're certainly not going to go into that. But we're going to talk about the budget. And let's just backtrack a little bit and look at where the year starts in South Africa. So the year starts when the president gives SONA. That's where the political year starts, right? The financial year kind of kicks off with the budget, but we can't look at those two in isolation. SONA is the precursor to the budget, what's coming and what's not coming, what's nice and what's not nice. And what did our president do this year? He took credit for 30 years of doing nothing, right? He actually took 30 years and he gave the government of the day the credit for everything they didn't achieve, right? So what did he say? He paid tribute and gave credit to the resolute South Africans of the last 30 years. That group of people or that nation that has overcome some of the hardships of the past, etc., etc. He's taken credit for putting a stop to state capture. And then he goes on to tell us about how 200 people are currently being prosecuted, how we've recovered 14 billion rand and we've frozen a further 8 billion rand for things that have come out of the State Capture Commission. He doesn't say very much about the 1 trillion rand that's sitting in Dubai. All right? He doesn't say very much about any of those things. So have we stopped state capture? We've probably arrested it. We've probably brought it to an end or put a halt to it. Did we prosecute the 200 people? I don't know about anyone in this room, but do any of you know about anyone that's been in an orange jumpsuit as far as state capture goes? No. Happy? Not happy. We shouldn't be happy, right? But nothing's happened. And then he goes on and he speaks about providing opportunities in democratic South Africa. And he goes on and he speaks about a young lady called Tinswalo. And he tells the story about Tinswalo and how she was born into democracy and she went to a state-funded school and then she got a bursary from NSFAS and then she started working and he doesn't talk about the 50% of other Tinswalos that can't find work anywhere in the country with their degrees, with their diplomas and with everything else. So ladies and gentlemen, somewhere in all of this, somebody is living in Lula land or Lala land or whatever we want to call it. But somewhere we're not acknowledging everything that we have. Now, by the time I'm done today, you guys are going to say I'm a prophet of doom. And no, I'm not the prophet of doom. But there's certain facts we need to look at. And we need to decide, Kevin mentioned it's an election year. No vote goes to waste, right? These are the things that we need to take into account. This is the stuff that we need to be informed about. So what did the president admit, right? He admitted that we've got a stagnant economy, right? And by implication, that the government of the day has failed to kickstart the economy, to give us something to get us going. We haven't done that, right? He has admitted that we've got high youth unemployment, but he says that on the back of the success of Tintswalo. Now, the two don't talk to each other, right? He then goes on and he says, we're currently fixing the electricity and energy and logistics crisis. Now, what is the state of the nation? Go and analyze it for the last 30 years. We're gonna do, we're gonna do, we're gonna do. Very little is actually we have achieved, we have delivered, we have done all of these things. And that, unfortunately, is the harsh reality of what it is that we're gonna deal with. He acknowledges that local government is failing, and ladies and gentlemen, not only is it is failing dismally, right? There is nothing in local government that works. If we go to the outlying provinces, the Northwest Province, Mpumalanga, the Eastern Cape, Free State for that matter, ladies and gentlemen, those potholes would be nice to have because they don't have roads. They don't have roads. That's unfortunately the reality that we're currently faced with. And then for me, the single biggest thing remains crime. It doesn't matter if we don't have roads, it's fine, we can get 4x4s, right? It doesn't matter if we don't have power because all of us have adjusted and put in generators and solar and all of those nice things, right? What do we do about crime? Because even if you have private security, they're in your complex, right? They're in the estate that you live in. What about we can't walk out in the streets? One of the things that I find most fascinating, and ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, Namibia is probably one of the most boring countries. It's one of the most beautiful countries, but probably one of the most boring countries to go to. You know what I found fascinating 2 weeks ago? Was being able to walk through the streets of Walvisbaai and Windhoek and Swakopmund and not feel threatened at midnight in any way whatsoever. And when you do that walk, you actually realize this is what we miss in South Africa. Think about most of you sitting in this room travel overseas. What's the thing that stands out for you most? There's movement on the streets at night. People are walking. People go to restaurants. People do all of it. We don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury, and that is something that we need to deal with. And what did the president say? We will be appointing 20,000 more police officers this year, right? But last year we had 10,000 more and the crime stats went up. And the crime stats went up. So how does that help us? Let's move on. Now we go to the budget. That's the president. The president told us we achieved all of these things and this is what we're going to do. And then comes the finance minister, and what's the first thing that he says in his budget speech? He says, economics are about creating the pie. Politics is about distributing the pie. Right? In Cape Town language, jy kan die pie maak, ek gaan hom eet. Right? In Cape Town language, jy kan die pie maak, ek gaan hom eet. Right? So, the first thing we go is we talk about the pie and how we want to redistribute the pie. And to an extent, he's right. Economics, you, me, the productive South African, generates the pie, generates the revenue, and it is up to government to distribute the revenue. What he omits to say, it's about distributing the revenue equitably, right, in the best interest of everybody in the country. Not in the best interest of those people that sit here in, what's it, the Val Street, what's that nice building that you guys have here in Cape Town? The Chamber, right? You guys know that. It's not about distributing the money there. Ladies and gentlemen, I say we are one good government. We are one good government away from turning the corner in South Africa, right? The question is, what is the good government? That's the question, right? Every government is going to have corruption and all of these nice things in it. But it's about putting the majority back into the country and not taking the majority out of the country. Right? That's what it comes down to. And in South Africa's context, that's what will make a good government. All right, so what did the minister say? Between 2024 and 2026, growth is projected to average 1.6%. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't get to 3% in South Africa, we're not going to get rid of unemployment. We're not going to turn the corner. We're not going to get our infrastructure going. But to get to 3%, we need investment that we don't have the funds for. It's that simple. How are we going to get to the 1.6%? It's going to be supported by the expected easing of power cuts. Then he goes, in the very next line, he says, but the risk to us achieving it is the constraints in power cuts or in power. Now, on the one hand, you're saying we expect easing of power. In the very next sentence, you say we're going to be constrained by power cuts. Oh, Mr. Minister, you know, some of us actually read what you say. All right? Some of us actually have an opinion about what you say. Lower inflation supporting household consumption and credit extension. If any of you have tried to apply for finance on a car, on a bond, or whatever the case is at the moment, the banks are not giving that credit. Right? Everybody is overstretched in South Africa, so we're not getting that. So we're banking on inflation coming down, disposable income going up, and the banks beginning to lend again to fuel spending in the country. And then high sovereign credit risk. We'll talk a little bit about that as I go on today, because that is the single biggest thing facing us at the moment. We are indebted to the hilt. Right? We cannot service the debt anymore. And there was a certain acronym that came up in this budget speech that I'll talk about just now. That acronym tells us how far we've come. We've dipped into we've put our hands in the cookie jar. We put our hands in the rainy day savings. And that's unfortunately the reason we find ourselves where we are. So the economic outlook, we expect growth to be 0.6%, which is, if you're going to look at our BRICS countries and our BRICS counterparts, we are by far the lowest, off a low base. Off a low base. All the others have high bases. We've got the lowest base. The medium outlook has improved marginally with a growth forecast of 1.6%. Ladies and gentlemen, last year, he said we're going to have a 1.8% average growth going forward. This year, it's 1.6%, and I guarantee you next year, he's going to say it's 1.4%, and so on and so forth. Because as long as we go on the trajectory we're going, we're not getting better. We're getting worse. GDP growth has averaged 0.8% since 2012. Right? So we're going to go from 0.8%, and in the next 3 years, we're going to grow by 1.6%. We're going to double it in the next 3 years. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. All right? Long-term growth is highly dependent on improving capacity, energy, freight rail, all of those nice things. Ladies and gentlemen, what was the one stated objective of the government of the day when they came to power in 1994? Privatization is not on the table for anybody. What have we done now? The Port of Durban has got an external partner to run the port. Call it what you want to. That's privatization. You're giving third parties, the private sector, access to the rail network. What is that? Call it what we want to, it's privatization. And we have the whole world trying to get their fingers in the cookie jar at Eskom and get a piece of the pie. And what are we saying? We must open up to that. So that is privatization. Economic growth, he talks about structural reforms and improvement in the state capability to raise growth. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means going forward. All right, the risks to the fiscal outlook as it stands, load shedding I've already spoken about. Broken rail and ports. When we can, it doesn't matter how good our farmers are. It doesn't matter how good our manufacturers are. It doesn't matter how good our textile industry is. It doesn't matter how good we are by getting our stuff out. What did the president say in the SONA speech? Products of South Africa find their way to all corners of the world. He's absolutely right, and it's rotten by the time it gets there. right? Because we can't get it out in time. We've got backlogs of everything. We've got perishables that go off waiting to get onto a ship at the ports. That's the reality of what we're faced with. Lower economic or low economic growth, I've spoken about that. Rising debt and borrowing costs, we'll talk about that. Ladies and gentlemen, he said last year and the year before, our cost of borrowing will go up to 18 cents in the rand. We're now at 21 cents in the rand. So we're not getting better. We're getting worse. Everything he's saying to us is getting worse. And I have significant difficulty in trying to reconcile last year's numbers to this year's numbers. I can't do, some of the stuff just doesn't balance, right? And I've tried it and I sat a long time with it. It just doesn't balance. And an unaffordable public wages. That's my point. Neither the president or the finance minister said it. But I'm saying we cannot afford the public wages that we have in South Africa. Very simply, our civil servants, for the most part, are underworked and overpaid. We're one of the only countries in the world where our civil servants get paid more than their private sector counterparts. Get paid more than and that's a fact. That's a fact, right? So let's look at the growth projections going forward. This is from the World Bank. The global economy is expected to grow by 3.1%. The advanced economy is by 1.6%, 1.5%, and 1.8% over 3 years. But remember that those are of very high bases. That's of the US economy's base, of the UK's economy base, of the European economy's basis. The emerging world is going to grow by 4.1% to 4.2% over the next 3 years. And we hope to grow by 1.6%. Right? So these are things we need to think about. So if we look at the table on the side, Brazil is going to grow by 3.1% this year, Nigeria by 2.8%, and we come in with a great, credible 0.6%. Right? And if we look at Brazil going forward, same story. India, 6%, 6.5%, and 6.5% over the next 3 years. And those are big economies. We're a small economy in all of that. So ladies and gentlemen, we do have issues, and we need to address these issues. And government's not going to do it on their own. There's been a tacit admission that they can't do it on their own, but they don't create the environment for the private sector to meaningfully participate in it. All right, the context of the budget. So what is the real context, the backdrop to it? It's an election year, right? What did we expect, right? It's an election year. We couldn't put up taxes. We couldn't put up VAT. We couldn't do any of those things because we jeopardize where the voters are going to go when those things happen, right? So it is an election year. He didn't have the luxury of providing an election budget, unfortunately, right? He didn't have the room to move. He didn't have the space to do it. Question, is the national budget the full picture? I don't think it is, because our local government and our municipalities are severely indebted. That debt doesn't come through to the national budget, right? The SOEs are severely indebted. That debt doesn't come through to the national budget. So to put that in perspective, and we'll see later on, the total debt of South Africa is expected to peak at 6 trillion rand, right, over the next 3 years. But it excludes the state-owned enterprises debt. Now, rough calculation of the state-owned enterprises, it's about 1.4 trillion in addition to that. And that excludes local government because I don't have a clue what that number is. But it's got to be huge. It's got to be huge, right? So the budget really doesn't, or our financial reporting doesn't promote absolute transparency as far as that goes. Failure to kickstart the economy, I've already spoken about this. Unsustainable sovereign debt levels. We need to get that under control, and we're not going to do it. Not in terms of what's there, we're not going to do it. Narrowing tax base. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll see later on in this presentation, that person bowing under the weight of tax are many of you sitting in this room. Many of you sitting in this room. Many of the productive people. You know, economies, communities, societies around the world are made up of consumers and producers. The taxpayers are the producers. Everybody else is consuming, right? So we need to take a look at that. The inability to stem crime, we've already spoken about that. Increasing social demands, right? The culture of non-payment and entitlement, right? That something is due to us because. Something is due to us because Jan van Riebeeck landed here in 1652. That's his problem, right? Let's move on, right? Let's move on. And then international events. The war in the Ukraine, it's pushed up fuel prices, food prices, and everything else that goes with that. South Africa's stance on Gaza and Palestine, which is probably the most admirable thing. I spoke to someone from Lebanon the other day, and he said, you cannot believe the respect that South Africa has earned, specifically in the Middle East region and North African region, by their stance on that. And I agree with that. But that's not going to stop Mr. Trump from saying, well, AGOA is going to be a problem because of your stance on that, right? So unfortunately, it's likely or it's probable that we will be punished for the stance that we've taken on that, irrespective of whether that stance is right or wrong, and irrespective of your affiliation to that. But it is something that is or is likely to impact South African economy. All right, some of the solutions. So what did he say? We're going to increase taxes. He didn't say it out so nicely, but what did he say? We're not going to move the tax brackets for inflation. Right? Effectively, if any of you sitting in this room gets a tax increase and a salary increase this year, either below inflation or you move to the next bracket, you will be poorer off than when the year started. That's a fact, unfortunately. Increase in social grants. Ladies and gentlemen, my stance on it has always been, in any society, those that produce and contribute and can afford it needs to give to those that are vulnerable in society. So I have no issues with that. What I do have an issue with is it's got to be to a way where it's sustainable. Right? If it's not sustainable, then it's short-lived, it's short-sighted, and at some point it all comes down like a house of cards. Right? We're going to borrow more in the short term. Right? That's effectively what he said. We're going to borrow more in the short term. Why? Because last year he said, no, let's go back. In 2022, he said debt will be peaking at 69% of GDP. In 2023, he said debt will be peaking at 73.6% of GDP. In 2024, we're now at 75.3% of GDP. So when is debt going to peak? Because he clearly doesn't have it under control. Right? You can't change every time you speak. Something changes. He's going to reduce non-interest expenditure by 81 billion over the next 3 years, mainly in the public sector wage bill. So what he said was, we are going to reduce non-interest expenditure by 81 billion rand because he's put aside 56 billion rand for teachers, nurses, and doctors. Right? That's what he's put aside, over and above those departments' budget votes. But what he hasn't done was, he said to all the other departments, you cater for your salaries and wages, etc., within your baseline budget. So for health and education, he's provided that over and above the baseline budget. For everybody else, he said, you cater for it within your baseline budget. Now, there's nowhere else that he can take the 81 billion from. He can't take it from infrastructure spending because the ports are falling down, the electricity is falling down. He's got to take it from somewhere. And the place he's going to take it from is going to be from wages. And we know how our public sector workers are when they don't get paid above inflation increases, right? In an election year. So there's a risk that comes with that. I've already spoken about the allocation of the 58 billion rand for the teachers and doctors, and then the 150 billion rand of, I learned a new acronym. I call it GFECRA. You can call it whatever you want to. GFECRA, GFECRA, whatever tickles your fancy, you can call it, right? But for me, it's GFECRA. GFECRA. The gold and foreign exchange currency or contingency reserve account. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the story goes like this. If you had money in 2010 and you bought dollars or you bought gold at 10 rand to the dollar, and today the dollar is worth 20 rand, you still only have $1, but that dollar is worth 20 rand. In accounting terms, it's an unrealized profit. So that 500 billion is not sitting there. There's no vault with 500 billion rand in it. Right? Someone's actually got to take those dollars and those gold reserves and actually sell it for us to realize the 150 billion. And by the way, it's not 150 billion because this reserves forms part of the balance sheet of the South African Reserve Bank. If you take that out, you erode the balance sheet of the South African Reserve Bank. So what they said was the balance is 500 billion. We're going to take 150 billion and we're going to use it to alleviate debt. Right? We're not going to use it to alleviate debt. They say we're going to use it to pay debt. I'm telling you we're not going to use it to pay debt because we just don't do things like that. We don't take long-term fund. We use long-term funding to fund short-term consumable spending. That's what we do in South Africa. And that's something we need to change. If it goes to debt, I think it's a great move. If it goes to settling debt and bringing down the debt service cost, I think it's a great move. Whether it goes there remains to be seen. But we've got to take another 100 billion from there and leave it with the Reserve Bank to shore up their balance sheet. Right? So effectively, it's 250 billion. But what's the other message that comes with it? Think about it. Right? So now we're going into our reserves, our rainy day reserves. That's the first thing. The second thing is that balance only accumulates when our exchange rate to the dollar drops. So the message in there is we never expect the rand to come back significantly. Because if the rand comes back significantly, that account will drop in value. Right? So we never, so those of you that were banking, Professor Darby Ruud said last week, he thinks we should be priced at 1650. Right? You must stop using the Big Mac index. Right? You must use the real stuff that we work with. Right? So that's what I think is going to be there. The rand's not coming back to 1650. We can't afford for it to come back to those. It's that simple. All right. Some of the other solutions, we're going to promote investments in renewable energy. So we took the limit up from 30 watts to 100 watts, or 30 megawatts to 100 megawatts. We're putting in smart prepaid meters in certain municipalities, and we're giving them a conditional grant of 2 billion to do it. Now, what's a smart prepaid meter? It's one of those things that the municipality can control when your geyser's on and when your geyser's off and all of those nice things. And hopefully that assists with alleviating some pressure. We're going to fix the rail and ports because we have a roadmap. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I hear roadmap and I hear plan and I hear all of these nice things, I go all the way from the reconstruction and development plan to the national development plan to the energy crisis plan to the, now we have the national freight and logistics roadmap recovery plan. And if we could execute our plans as good as we can draw them up, we'd be the best country in the world. We'd be the best country in the world, but we just can't do that. But we've got a roadmap, so that's the first step, right? We are involving private sector support, so the private sector are getting access to the railways, they're getting access to the ports, so they're going to help out there. We've given 47 billion rand as a bailout or a guarantee to Transnet to sort them out. Let's see if they do that. We're going to encourage PPEs by reducing complexity with them getting involved, right? So no longer are we going to go through PPEs via proper tender. Well, we'll still have a proper tender process, but this long, drawn-out bureaucratic process. Now we're going to make it easier for people to get their hands in the cookie jar. all right? Because that's on, with all the best intentions in the world, the controls and the enforcement is not in place to make sure it doesn't happen. We're going to fund, or we're going to look at new instruments for funding infrastructure projects. Very little was said on this, but what it really comes down to, Shaukat, you'll know, would be something similar to a trust, where there's a flow-through of the funding that goes to there. I want to see, Chris, you're laughing, how they're going to implement that, right, going forward. Procurement for transformation, very interesting one. I thought we had that all the time with the Preferential Procurement Act, affirmative action, broad-based BEE, etc., etc. We had that all the time. Now they're saying we're going to have a set-aside. But we've had a set-aside all the time, right? Then they're saying, but we're going to promote BEE, women and youth in that. I'm saying, but we've had that all the time. What's changed? Then they say in the next sentence, the state should be the person or the one institution to get the best pricing of the products and commodities that they use, which I agree with, because they're the biggest buyer of commodities. But up to now, they've been paying between 1.2 and 2 times more than what they can source stuff on the market. Now, why is that? Because someone's not doing their job, right? So we're going to transform government procurement from the way it's already been transformed, all right? Manufacturing incentives for electric vehicles, this one you've got to admit, but brought a smile to your face, right? When you read this one, you thought, well, that's going to be really, really cool. We're going to give someone 150% tax deduction for any investment they make in producing electric vehicles, because those vehicles are not going to run under the current circumstances, right? So we've got to look at that and how that one works. All right. It's, by and large, there was no real fancy stuff in this budget. There was no surprises. There was no wow factor. It's an election year. We're giving back in so much, and we're doing this, and we're doing all of that. So revenue collection fell short of expectation by 56 billion rand. And instead of going through this slide, let's just look at that one. So that's the one we look at. And if we look at personal income tax, look how resilient we were. All of us. Kudos off to all of you. Hands off. We paid 10 billion bucks or 9.5 billion bucks more than they expected us to pay. Corporate tax paid 35 billion less than we should have got. Right? What was the other big one? VAT. They got 26 billion bucks on VAT, less than they were projecting to get. Now, those of you that attended this session last year, you remember I said to you, you cannot budget your corporate tax based on windfalls that you got in the previous years. And that was where the 35 billion fell short of, because we got windfall taxes because of the commodity prices in previous years. You cannot use your base on or you cannot use your budget or base your budget on an inflated base. Just makes no sense whatsoever. So these were all the things that we didn't get. Where was there? The 5 billion. Specific excise duties, right? We didn't collect 5 billion of that. Customs duties, 1.7, we didn't. So in total, we fell short by 56 billion in the current year. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we fall short by 56 billion, where do you think it comes from? We have to go and borrow it. It doesn't even come from taxpayers. Taxpayers don't have it anymore. We've got to go and borrow it, right? So that's the kind of stuff we need to look at. So that's where we fell short of 56 billion. Government debt has doubled since 2018 with very little spent on infrastructure. So again, we're taking debt, but we're using it to fund consumer spending. We're not using it to fund capital projects. So we're not growing the pie, right? The proverbial pie is not being grown. We are not creating an infrastructure and an environment for productive people. We've got a bottling plant in here. We've got manufacturers in here. We've got skilled people sitting in this room. But we're not creating an environment for them to thrive. And that's what we need to do, right? The public service wage bill I've spoken about already. And the social grants keep growing. Interestingly enough, there's a very small below inflation increase on the old age grant, on the foster care grants, on the early childhood grants. But there was no mention made of the COVID-19 grant. Now, the COVID-19 grant, what they did say was, we will be re-looking at that grant. Now, if you think about it, remember the COVID-19 was a temporary grant that we extended and we extended and we extended. Now, we can't call it a COVID-19 grant anymore, isn't it? COVID-19 is gone. But it's a permanent grant because we're never going to get rid of it, because those 10 million beneficiaries who get that grant are never going to live without that grant, right? So what are we doing? We're really looking at what we're going to call that grant. So it's still in place, it's still extended, it's just we're re-looking what's probably going to be a basic income grant or something along those lines. The debt to GDP ratio is expected to stabilize at 75.3% of GDP, up from 73.6% last year. Now, very simply, in an emerging economy, that number should be 60%. Anything above 60% puts too much weight on the GDP, right? We're just not going to make it. All right, we've spoken about that one. Okay, so this year, for the first time, what I've done is I've actually done a comparison on the top part is what he said last year. The bottom part is what he said this year. So for the first time, I'm actually looking at the consistency, and let's see how it goes. So budget primary surplus, this year we're going to have a primary surplus as well. So for those of you that don't understand, primary surplus is that revenue exceeds expenditure excluding interest expenses. All right? So in accounting terms, it's EBIT. Right? The consolidated budget deficit will decline from 4.6% to 4.2%. That's what he said last year, and then reaching 3.2%. This year he says we didn't reach the 4.2%, we went up to 4.9%. Right? Now, when you're talking about 0.7% of 2 trillion rand, that's a lot of money that we're talking about. Right? Debt servicing requires an increased share of government's available resources. This year, he said, for the first time, we will be breaching 20 cents to the rand in terms of what we spend. Okay, we're going to run out of time, so let's move on a little bit quicker. So we've already spoken about what we had last year, and I've shown you how we didn't achieve this, and we fell short of 56 billion of that, and the tax revenue of the current budget is 1.863 billion. Now, again, we didn't meet 1.787. We didn't make it, right? But we're forecasting to go up. We've got a forecast to go up, right? But where does it come from? And they tell you we are placing the burden on the shoulder of the individual taxpayer. Personal tax is the area where they're looking to recover, right? It's just something's got to give somewhere. Again, very little, there's nothing exciting in terms of where we are here. 332 billion budget balance, but that's after interest costs, all right? So we've got to take into account interest costs. The split of the revenue that we have is national departments get 47.7%, provinces get 42.4%, and local government gets 9.9%. Now, you may sit back and say, but local government only gets 9.9%. Why is that so? Remember, local government generates their own revenue. So besides the taxes that we're paying here, we're paying rates and taxes down there, we're paying everything else to local government, water, sanitation, all of those nice things. So they should be self-sustainable. The theory is that they shouldn't get anything from here because they're self-sustainable. But when last have any of you looked at the books of any of our local governments or our municipalities? They don't make for good reading. All right, the budget expenditure, the column we're looking at is that one going forward. If we look very closely, only learning and culture is more than our debt service cost. So the second highest line item in our budget going forward is going to be our interest paid to financiers of the budget. So unfortunately, that's the way it is. That's what we're going to deal with. Interestingly enough, on learning and culture from a South African perspective, our kids who go to school generally for 12 years are more schooled than most children around the world, right? But the quality of our education doesn't put them in good stead with the international peers, specifically from a numeracy and science perspective. Our literacy rates are very high. We can read the basics, etc. So the problem is not money, because we put more money into education than we do anywhere else. The problem is the quality of our education, given the amount of time that our kids spend at school, right? So the youngsters that are sitting here, guys, make good use of the time that you have at school, right? It will hold you in good stead going forward. So I think that's something we need to look at. That's something we need to work on. And it was all when the curriculum changed. When was it? 2001, when things just started going the wrong way, right? So that's the kind of stuff that we need to look at. Health, interestingly enough, comes third in the budget. What he hasn't mentioned this year, he's given a very small allocation to it, was the National Health Insurance Plan. Now, remember this, the elephant in the room? And he said, but the small allocation for that, is to prepare the patient database, to prepare the hospitals, to get the hospitals functioning, etc., etc. But that's to do the groundwork. It's not to do anything else, do the groundwork. I don't think many of us sitting in this room is going to be alive to see the NHI happening in South Africa. Right? Maybe I'm wrong, but that would mean that personal income tax has got to go up 5, 6, 7, 8%, and VAT has to go up 10% for us to be able to fund it. And if VAT goes up 10%, right, then our biggest export that we have, that I'll talk about just now, will just become a bigger export. All right, I'm not going to go through all the details of what it is. I've already spoken about education. We've already spoken about municipalities. Interesting one, the old age or the grant scheme, social development. See those other grants there? In there is where your COVID grant sits, right? That's the other grants number. Interesting statistic that may make a difference or gives you something to think about is that currently, for every 2 people that have for every 1 person that has a job in South Africa, 2 people are receiving a grant. Right? It's not nice, but it's true. Right? So for every 1 person working, 2 people get a grant. Police and peace and security, yeah, I would just once love to see the stats come down, right? Just to see that we're turning the corner somewhere. Because I think if we get that right, a lot of other things fall into place, right? Debt service costs we've spoken about, and the contingency reserve, that's my pet hate in the budget, right? Because I don't know why we need $5 billion put aside all the time. Okay, some of the tax proposals. We're going to bring in 15 billion rand. I'm going to talk about that just now. That's by not increasing the tax tables. Like everything else, we're going to tax the cigarettes and the alcohol to death, and I've never seen anyone give up smoking or alcohol because of the tax. So I don't know how much that's going to help us. We haven't put up the road accident fund levy for 3 years in a row now. We can't, very simple, it's not because we don't want to, it's we can't afford to. Because we put it up, it gets to fuel, fuel gets to food, it goes to everything else, public transport, everything else. And what happens? It pushes inflation through the roof. So it's an inflation-containing measure more than a tax relief measure, right? We're going to implement the global minimum corporate tax. I read the draft bill, right? I don't understand it. And my tax knowledge is, I would say, above average, right? But I don't understand it. And I can tell you that the oak who's tasked with implementing it at SARS understands it even less, right? So that how we're going to make it work, I don't know. But we better make it work because we're budgeting on it. We're banking on it giving us $8 billion in 25, 26 years. If we don't get it, $8 billion is gone, right? And then we're going to put in, we've already spoken about the electric cars, and the one that's not here is the 2-pot retirement system. So ladies and gentlemen, let me quickly touch on that in case I don't get to it later. As of the 1st of September this year, all your retirement savings will be split into 2 pots, a savings pot and a retirement pot. Now, what's currently happening is people are resigning from their jobs to get access to their retirement funds. So what that's meant to be is to give people the opportunity to access their retirement funds pre-retirement. So they can dip into 1/3 of their retirement funds pre-retirement. with one catch. Whatever you dip into will be taxed at full marginal rates. They're banking on it so much that they think the rush on it between September and February next year will be so big, and the tax that they'll collect from there is 5 billion rand in this financial year. Right? So be aware of it. If you can afford to leave it in the fund, leave it in the fund. So just be aware of that. But there is also an understanding that people need liquidity, people need access to funds. All right, so again, a comparison between last year and this year. We keep on pushing personal taxes higher and higher and higher. And that little cartoon I've had there for 2 years in a row now, I'm going to give that guy a name. I'm going to call him Edward, right? And his surname is Kieswetter, right? And the only reason I've got to do that is because you saw he extended his term for another 2 years now, right? Because I like the feeling of power. I think he likes that, right? So with old Edward, the jury is out on whether we're going to collect that. But again, I showed you just now, corporate taxes have fallen. VAT we didn't collect this year. But again, we didn't meet that number, but we're putting it up next year, right? Corporate taxes, we didn't meet that number. That one's slightly up, so it's not a big thing. Fuel levies will go up. And interestingly enough, last year we got 3 billion rand more on fuel levies. You know why? Because every time there was load shedding, someone turned on a generator. Right? When you turned on a generator, we got fuel levies. Interesting fact, 79% of South Africa, or South Africans, are avid internet users. You know why? Every time there's load shedding, everyone gets onto their phones, right? So those are the things that do happen. There's the debt. That's where we were in 2013, 1.3 billion rand in debt. 2024, 5.5 trillion, or 1.3 trillion, 5.5 trillion rand. That's where we are 10 years on. And what has happened to infrastructure? Can you see that debt in the buildings and infrastructure and the roads and all the rest of it? No, you can't. No, you can't. So that's interesting. Interesting enough, and this is one I again went to look at, that was last year's number. And if you see there, we were peaking debt at 73.6%. What he did was, when he did this year, he didn't bring in last year's number. He brought in the medium-term budget. And the medium term went up to 77%. And I'm saying, guys, you're not comparing apples and apples. You've got to compare your 75. So he comes and he says, our 75.3% is lower than expected. And I'm saying, but you're fooling someone, because the 75.3% is lower or is higher than the 73.6% you had last year this time. So just very interesting. We talk about spin doctors. We've got some good ones. All right? That's how we're going to do. That's where the tax impacts for this year. Interestingly enough, he did say for this year they are not adjusting the tax brackets, right? And that's going to give us another 16.3 billion rand. But look what this table comes straight out of the budget documentation at National Treasury. But according to this table, they're not going to adjust tax brackets for the next 3 years, right? I'm hoping it's a slip. I'm hoping it's a slip, because if it's not a slip, we're in trouble. If we're not a slip, they're not going to give us inflation bracket creep for the next 3 years. That means they're not going to reduce or increase tax rebates for the next 3 years, and the knock-on effect. So he didn't say it. He said this year they're not going to do it, but the documents say something else. So be aware of that. It's something I'm pretty sure that someone's going to take up with him via the structures that they are. All right, very interesting. My least favorite slide of the lot. The biggest export South Africa currently has is its taxpayers, because we are leaving the country in droves, and our taxpayers are taking their know-how, their capital, their entrepreneurship, everything else to other countries and paying their tax there. Why? Because 200,000, 197,000 taxpayers earning over 1.5 million pay 32% of all taxes. 200,000, not 2 million, ladies and gentlemen, 200,000. Right? If we go a little bit further, for people that earn over or to have taxable income over 750,000, we have 12%, that's 27 and 32 is 60%. Right? So a little, that's 600, 800,000 people. 800,000 people pay 60% of all tax in South Africa. Now you remember right at the beginning, I said that the tax base is narrowing and it's unsustainable. That's what I meant when I said about it. Our biggest export is our taxpayers. We actually sending our taxpayers to leave. Because those people there are also the people that can afford to leave, that will be welcomed and open armed by other countries, etc., etc., etc. And if that, can you imagine what that does if all those 200 people decided they want to immigrate? But let's think, we don't even want to think about it, because that will be the end, right? On a corporate income tax side, less than 800 companies pay approximately 70% of all corporate income tax in South Africa. It's a fact. And what are we going to do now? We're going to bring in the multinational tax, the complicated one, that's going to tax them even more. Doesn't tell a nice story, does it? Right. There's the tax tables. Nothing changes this year. So some of the proposals that we do have, there's no change in the tax brackets. I've already spoken about that. We get no benefit this year on anything else. So medical tax credits stay the same, the rebates stay the same, CGT exemptions stay the same. Donations, tax and exemptions, estate duty abatements. Shaukat and Chris, when last were those adjusted? 2007? Right? 2007. Now, think all of that. If we take all of that up, compounded, how much that should go up and how much that should stay. So it was a very sneaky way over the years for us to have got additional tax from those taxpayers that have those things. There's no change to the VAT rate. There was never going to be an election, yeah? No change to the fuel levy. I suppose we must say thank you for that one. But it does save us everywhere else as far as inflation goes. No change to the annual interest exemption and tax-free investment limits. An interesting one, because we're not encouraging people to save anymore. We're not encouraging people to save anymore. Carbon taxes, right, is going up. So we're going to get a bit of an increase in petrol price besides the one that's coming tonight in April because of the carbon tax increases. Like I said, nobody stopped drinking and smoking from the tax that we put on there. And I'm saying, I think even if you put that up to 20%, nobody would stop drinking and smoking in any event because of it. So maybe that's one way to do it. The learnership allowance, that's a welcome one. So there is a little bit of good news. Given you and your teams, the learnership allowances are big ones for most corporates that employ youngsters. We've spoken about the 150% investment for the electric and hydrogen cars. For the BMW fans, BMW is pushing the hydrogen-powered cars quite significantly in terms of what they want to do. The global minimum tax for multinationals, you've got to be earning more than 750 million euros in revenue to fall into that bracket. That's 15 billion rand. We don't have many companies in South Africa that does that. The two-part retirement savings system, I've already spoken about. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm bang on time. I want to say thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. And thank you very much for attending.
Bashier, thank you. You can see why I said that wisdom and that insight, just to prepare us to give us all the facts and to know what's coming. So thank you, Bashier. Let's keep him up here and let's have some questions. There's one over there.
Hi there. On this electrical vehicle thing, there's 150% incentive.
Yeah.
Is that a rebate of sorts?
So for those entities that produce electric vehicles will get 150% tax deduction of any investment that they have in the production of vehicles.
Wouldn't someone then have to be footing that 50%?
Yeah, the other taxpayers. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting question. But you know, I did two points I didn't make in the presentation. I did a radio show with one of the KZN radio stations last Tuesday, and when I spoke about GFECRA, the one listener asked a some interesting question, and when I thought about it afterwards, I thought to myself, that was such a valid question. And he said, for us to get the GFECRA amount, there's an assumption that the gold and the dollars are there. Are they there? Right? Which is a very relevant question. The other one was, what would I do if I were made finance minister tomorrow to turn the ship? Right? And I think there's no right or wrong answer. But having been exposed to global and international trade, I just abolish exchange control and open the economy up and say to the world, bring your money to South Africa. You can take it out when the time comes. And I think we'll see an influx of money, the likes of which this country has never seen. Right? And it may not be something that's going to last for 10 or 15 years, but at least in the next 3 to 5 years, it will kickstart the economy in a way that will really help us. Next question.
Two more questions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First question is basically about the government initiative plan. I see it, it came through in the monetary policy review. It also came in his, the SONA speech where he spoke about it. I can't unpack that one. I don't know what it means because I've seen it coming through the years.
Are you talking about the presidential youth?
Yeah, the presidential youth.
The
those
presidential
two.
youth employment initiative.
Yeah, that
But
one.
so the presidential youth employment initiative is really an initiative driven out of the president's office about creating opportunities for employment for the youth. So one of the things, for example, is last year, you'll recall, not sure your school should have been a recipient of the assistance that they placed in classrooms. And they placed 1 million assistants last year. And that all came from the youth. So it's those kind of programs that are being invested or investigated outside of the president's office to drive employment in the youth. The initiative is absolutely right. But we need to be careful that we don't get stuck in not modernizing our systems and becoming fit for purpose because we want to create employment. Because if we become fit for purpose and we can get the economy steamrolling, then the jobs will come with that.
In terms of, in this country, we have more consumers and producers. If you look at the developing world, you'll see that we find that they're turning the table around. In China, in some of the other countries, developing countries, they're turning things around. So we need to focus more on entrepreneurship. And I don't think the government is supporting that initiative well enough. Because if you look at our current status, our retail market is captured, our wholesale market is captured, and so it goes on. I'm coining new terms here, but that is what's happening. Our own talent sits right around us in this room as well. The youth, there's lots of talent, there's lots of potential. We need to tap into them, invest into them, because that's what Japan and China does.
Agree 100%. I must add one thing to that is that over the years, the whole idea of labor protection has served as a disincentive from an employment perspective. So you have employers that are sitting there and saying, well, can we get away with having 5 people instead of having 10 people? Because 10 people is 10 different issues, 10 different processes. And that, unfortunately, constrains it. Now, just if I can add a real life example, I've got a brother who's just left to the States in December. This brother of mine, no qualification, no nothing. He is, in layman's terms, he's a hustler, right? He sees where tonight's food is coming from and he'll get past it. And I spoke to him the other day and he said, I got a gig somewhere, right? I said, good, I'm happy for you. He says, but you know how this place works. I said, what do you mean you know how it works? He says, The owner can come in tomorrow morning and say, I had a bad dream about you last night. Pack your stuff and go. All right? But he's prepared to take the chance on you because he can do that. He's actually prepared to take the chance on you because he can do that if it doesn't work. Right? So imagine if he couldn't take the chance, or if it didn't work, he was stuck with you. What then? Does he take the chance or doesn't he take the chance? But I agree with you 100%. Right? Youth, it's the future. It's all we've got. Yes, sir.
Mr. Adams, so the state that our country is in concerns me very much, and I would say for all South Africans, and it doesn't help to always hear the doom and gloom about everything. And I think you've already answered this, but what do you think? It is a hard question to answer, but like, what is it that has to be done in order to get ourselves out of this? And realistically, how long will it take in order to reach an equilibrium where we're a profitable people?
If you listen to what Kevin said right at the beginning, right? And it's something I've lived by my whole life. It's probably the one thing that works for me in everything I do, is that nothing is important to a willing mind, or is impossible to a willing mind. And the same applies whether it's one person, a group of people, or a nation. Right? If we are willing to make the change, and we are willing to accept that we have problems, because I think that's one of the biggest issues that we currently have in government, is there's got to be an admission before you can fix things. It doesn't matter whether it's personal, whether it's business, whether it's community, there must be an admission that something's wrong before you can fix things. If you take credit for everything you've done or you haven't done the last 30 years, that's not an admission that things are wrong. So if we make that as a collective, make the decisions. And Kevin was right. It all happens in May this year, right? Where the collective has a voice to make it. I firmly believe we are one good government away from turning this country. We are one good government away. Ladies and gentlemen, look north of us. Look north of us. We're still the only hope for Africa. We can change everything. We can change the trajectory of a continent if we want to do it, but we must do it the right way, right? And we want good government. And one good government is just less of the bad that we do. We're never going to eradicate it. Let's be real about that as well. But just less of it. There's one they can.
And also, I think there's a lot of work going on to prepare us for coalition politics, Bashier. There's a lot of work going on in parliament and government to prepare this country for coalition politics. And there are a lot of countries who succeeded in coalition politics. And that's going to be the future, where businesses, private individuals, government all work together.
You know, Kevin, if you put responsibility and accountability, and you can get that right in coalition politics, it can work. Absolutely. But without accountability, without responsibility, it's a scary thought.
Absolutely. We've run out of time, so quick questions.
Sure. Thank you so much. Very insightful. To youth, I want to add gender. So I think women in leadership is also very important. But thanks for the insights. My question is the other elephant in the room, and I'm just curious about your opinion on the impact of corporate corruption. So we can point fingers at government, at state capture. Of course, state capture is linked to the corporate sector, but we also know about the Steinoffs and other corporates like that. So what's your opinion on the impact of that on our economy? Thank you.
So I actually think the two shouldn't be viewed differently. I actually think that the two of them work together because, generally speaking, one is an enabler of the other. Right? And if there's no consequence management on either of them, right, it just continues. And I think that's the part that we need to look at, is what's the consequence management? We can all say what we want to about the US and the economy and how they print money and how it's smoke and mirrors and all of those nice things. Everyone has got their own views on it. But if something like state capture happened in the US, all right, the whole governing party would have been in jail. Not just 4 or 5. So it's about accountability and consequence management and how we get that right. I mean, I know the CFO of, well, ex-CFO of Eskom and Transnet and all of this oak now wants to go to Dubai. Right? Can we guess why he wants to go to Dubai? Right? And the chances are he's probably going to go. That's the sad part, is he's probably going to go. I mean, how is it even possible that we could mess up the extradition of the three brothers from Dubai? How is it even possible that we could mess that up? But we can win the ICJ matter in The Hague. How is it even possible that we could mess that up?
Thank you, Bashier. Quick one.
Thanks for that very honest share of what isn't happening here in this country. But the question is, you're saying we want government away from fixing things. What many people are saying is, but what is that government? Where do they go? Yes, there's coalition, but people need those answers. What do they do? So they don't know where to go, and they say, oh, we might as well just stick with what we have. How do we educate people on that?
Unfortunately, I don't have the answer, right? But I can tell you that it lies in a coalition. And I can't tell you how that coalition is going to look. But it lies in a coalition for the simple reason that as a society, we're still too divided. Right? We are still too divided. And then every time something seems to be going right, someone either commits suicide or shoot themselves in the brain and doesn't die. Right? I mean, that's political parties. That's what they do. Every time you think, well, there's someone where something is actually looking like they know what they're talking about, then I don't know, just loses it somewhere along the plot. I mean, there's so many things we want to do, but we're not going to get into the politics of it, right? So we're not going to get into the detailed politics because then we're going to be here for a long time.
And I think there are quite a lot of good political parties that have come to the fore that are working. If you look at it, there's a lot of options now for people to vote, and that will then see the coalition politics.
Given there's good people,
Good
right?
people out
I mean, you know, even they may be in the minority, but not even in the minority. By and large, the people in the public service, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of good people in there. There's a lot of good people. There's a lot of smaller parties that want to make a difference, that actually believe they can make a difference. You know, I come from a little town in Pretoria called Lordium. And there's a young councillor now with the Green Party, who's Action SA. And he was in school a few years after me. But the little things, he has his pothole brigade that drives around and fixes up potholes, that takes an initiative in beautifying the entrances of Lodium, which has become overgrown, and cleaning up the cemetery that is just an absolute disaster. And yes, he's doing it for political reasons, etc., etc. But it's a difference that's tangible and we can see it. Right? And that's what it comes down to. I don't care why you're doing it. But if people can see the difference, that's what makes the difference. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's Action SA, there's Songezo Zibi with Rise SA, there's Musi, Rise Mzansi, Musi with Build One South Africa, there's Gayton with Patriotic Alliance, and there's so many of them now. But I do believe that they're all working together now to have that one coalition that we can stand for. So we got to have hope. We've got to work at it. We've got to get our votes in, and then we can talk again. There's one last question here, and then we're going to end. And we've got Loreko got here a couple of taxis later, and he's here.
Good morning. I think something you didn't touch on is maybe corporate governance and capital flight. You know, that for me is a big thing. Also, the other thing, the triple PFA, Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. If we look at our construction, 30% of those tenders must go to women. That is a gangster or a mafia thing. That 30% doesn't come to us as women in construction. It goes to where it needs to, because that's a loophole in the system. So that's a bit of a problem for me. Also, the other thing that we're very involved with investors. Investors are keen. They've actually given South Africa or the government opportunities where they don't even have to pay back. They're saying because they're concerned that if we have a complete blackout, what's going to happen to the neighboring countries? So they've given them solutions. And for the last 6 months, our government hasn't stepped up to the plate because they don't have the money. How do we, I'm a very big supporter of small modular nuclear reactors because I believe that's the way to go. we did get funding to come into South Africa. We have a problem in terms of bringing the money in. Government is saying, if you bring that money in, we'll tax you at 45%. That will, sorry, that won't work because it means we'll be putting these plants up at a loss. So we've got investors. So talking to investment in government and all of that, they say, Renee, we do not want political interference. Now, I'm not understanding, how is this political interference if we're bringing you solutions? And how do we bypass or support all of these? There's projects that needs to come into South Africa. How do we bridge those gaps?
Okay, so I think on the projects that need to come in, let's hope that this whole PPP reform makes a difference, right? We hope so. The procurement on the 30% and the construction mafia and all the rest of it, remember I said it was about the procurement of, we're going to transform what is already supposed to be transformed. So again, the jury is out on what it's going to look like on that. Capital flight, I actually did touch on it. The export of our taxpayers is capital flight, right? So that's the one thing. But I got news for you because it was something else that came up in last Tuesday's radio interview. Whoever wanted to take money out of this country has already taken it out. That's why I can say, abolish exchange controls and open up the economy, because whoever wanted to take money out has already taken it out. That money is outside. What abolishing exchange controls will do is open the doors for people to bring that money back in.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, give Bashier a big round of applause. So we've come to the end. We've got a nice, exciting bit. Please don't rush off. We could just stick around for another 6 minutes if you need to get going. Kirsty, please bring in Bashir's gift. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a partnership with Utando Bashier, where we are trying to get 10,000 of these hearts around the world. Kirsty, can you get your hand in here and put the light on? So we're trying to get 10,000 of these all over the world on buildings everywhere, and that's for you. As our speaker, we want you to put that in your office, in your business, and thank you. The heart. We've come to the end, ladies and gentlemen, but I want to, first of all, again, thank Douglas, Cape Town Marriott Hotel, Crystal Towers. Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you for walking the journey with us and for everything you do for us. Shed Studios, I've said to you what they do. Thank you. Glue Up for the platform, for working with us. The Amy Foundation students are outside. Please, or not students, staff, sorry. Please support them. Go out there. There's beautiful products made by the students. There's beautiful placemats, credit card holders, you name it. Go and shop till you drop. Use your credit card. My book is out there, Can Do, Making the Impossible Possible, if anybody wants to buy that. It's a leadership, business, and motivational book. To all our partners and to Nexia SAB&T, I want to give you a big round of applause to Sophie, Hassan, Wakar. Where's Wakar? Come, Wakar. Give Wakar a big round of applause, working with Kirsty there. Mawada, Deepak, and the whole team. Everybody at Nexia SAB&T. We value the partnership. And we are having the same breakfast in Joburg on Thursday. So if you know anybody in Joburg, there are some seats left. Please encourage them to join us on Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, also please become an Ubuntu member. Sign that pledge Ubuntu and work with us. If you want to sponsor a child at the Amy Foundation, sponsor a youth, please speak to the ladies outside and sign up to support Amy Foundation. And now I want to welcome up Lareko. Please come forward. This young man is a graduate of Amy Foundation. He started with us when he was a young boy. We enabled him to finish grade 12. He finished grade 12. He now got into UCT. And he's now studying opera. And this is the future, ladies and gentlemen. So please give Lareko Motele a big round of applause.
Every valley shall be exalted. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low. The crooked straight, the crooked straight, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain, and the rough places plain, and the rough places plain. The crooked straight, and the rough places plain.
Thank you. Wow, that's capable of. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end. Please remember Ubuntu. Go out there. It's a way of life. Go and practice it. Go and be Ubuntu ambassadors out there. Go and be part of changing the world. Remember what you've learned today. Go and share it with others. Make sure we're part of that resilience that's going to overcome some of these challenges. We're going to be part of the solution, each and every one of us. So thank you for being here today. Look out for the next ones. Also, thank you to Pearl for helping. I also forgot to thank Pearl. But to every one of you, thank you for being here. Please return your name tags to Kirsty and Ricardo out there. Go and shop till you drop with the Amy Foundation. And just keep in touch with us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day.